Hi, good morning, folks. Happy Sunday. This is Mike from UnknownTech.io, and we're going to continue on with the Getting Started with Kubernetes series. In this series, we're going to cover the maintenance operations around a Kubernetes cluster. We're going to cover two different things. The first thing we're going to cover is the backup of the etcd key value store. Extremely important to back this up, being able to restore if something happens or you need to recover from an outage or a disaster. So this is something that we're going to do. We're going to walk you through how to use etcd-ctl. We're going to install it, and then we'll walk through the process using the documentation on Kubernetes.io. So the first thing we're going to do is install etcd-ctl. So let's log back into our cluster control plane. I'm already logged in here, so let's just make sure that we are in the right now. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is install etcd-ctl, which is the command line utility to actually do etcd operations. So we're going to do a sudo apt get update y. So this is basically what I use. Remember, I'm using Ubuntu, so it may be a little bit different if you're using a Red Hat or CentOS variant of Linux. So let's go back here. And we're going to do the apt get update. Okay, I'm going to clear, and we're going to do sudo apt-get install -y etcd-client. Let's clear here. etcd-ctl version. Okay, so you can see here I have etcd-ctl version 3.3.25. So let's clear this. Now that etcd-ctl is installed, we're going to go to the Kubernetes.io site. I'm going to make this bigger, and we're going to type in etcd backup. And you can see here the first link it gives me is operating etcd clusters. This is the link that you want to go to. Okay, so basically what it's going to do is talk about etcd a little bit, how it's a consistent, highly available key value store for Kubernetes, right? For all your cluster data, etc. It's going to tell you how you should run it, the resource requirements, how to start it. So again, this was all part of the Kubernetes cluster install that we did a couple weeks back when we actually built this cluster. So what we're going to do is we're going to scroll down, and we're going to scroll down to backing up an etcd cluster, right? And etcd basically supports a built-in snapshot, right? So you might be able to create this from a live member with the etcd snapshot save command, or by copying the file from the etcd directory, not being currently used in the etcd process. So creating a snapshot will not affect the performance. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the below example for creating the snapshot. Now, one thing that you'll want to do here is, we'll do this right manually, but at some point we're going to create a cron job YAML. Remember that a cron job, or the declarative way of operating Kubernetes, is to create a YAML specification or a Kubernetes manifest file, however you want to call it, okay? And you're going to basically say, okay, this is what I want to happen. This is my desired outcome after I implement the Kubernetes manifest. Okay, so basically we'll do this manually. We'll show you where the save snapshot is. We'll verify the snapshot to make sure it's there, but this is not something that you're going to do on a manual basis, right? You're going to want to automate this. So you can actually do a cron job specification, right? And set up a schedule and then have that snapshot offloaded to like external storage, like an S3 bucket as an example, or a file store, which can then be saved offsite. Or you can send it to an object store that automatically sends it, or a file store that automatically sends it offsite. So in this part, we're going to do just the manual piece of it. We're going to verify that the snapshot database is there. And then when we get into the more advanced sections on declarative YAML specifications, we'll get into more about automating this process. As an example, we're going to use built-in files on Nutanix. So that's another option to have, right? Or built-in objects on Nutanix where you can send the file, like I said, or point it to a storage device, and then have that storage device tier that off into a third party or separate location like a cloud provider as an example, right? So you'll have this full backup of your key value store for your Kubernetes clusters. And this should happen on every Kubernetes cluster, right? You should be backing this up and restoring it. Now, you may not think like dev test or non-prod environments need to have this, but what I find in most enterprises is that even those environments are critical, right, to the continuation of innovation within the customer. And when those clusters or those solutions are down for any given period of time, that also causes pain, right, in a sense that innovation slows down, they can't test, etc. So again, I think like etcd backup should happen on every single cluster, unless you're building clusters declaratively through a GitOps process, right? So for example, and we'll talk about this again further down when we get into more automation, if your GitOps process or your CI/CD process actually builds the Kubernetes cluster itself and then tears it down, so more of a pave repave type solutioning, right, when it comes to non-prod environments for testing only. And in that case, you wouldn't have to back up your etcd cluster as an example. Okay, so let's get into going to the backup. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go through this process. I'm going to walk you through how to do this. We're going to use this command right here, which is the etcd-ctl API 3, etcd-ctl, and we're going to use the local endpoint, which is the cluster that we're on. And then I'm going to show you where we're going to get these certs. So let's get into that now. So first and foremost, what I like to do is I like to create another SSH session. So I have it. So let's go into the K8s control. And I'm going to do these side by side here. On the left hand side, I'm going to obtain the cert files, right? The location of the cert files, so I can put that in this command. So I'm going to copy this command. Okay, so let's copy it. We're going to put it in in my case, the right hand side SSH session. And I'm now going to go back and I'm now going to fill in the blanks here. So what I have to do here is I'm going to have to look at the etcd pod, right, to get this information. So where's the etcd pod? Remember what I talked about? Most Kubernetes management components are located in the kube system namespace. So if we go to kubectl get pods namespace kube-system, you'll scroll down and you'll see the etcd K8s control pod. That is the pod for the key value store, for the etcd key value store. So how do we get the CA cert information, the cert file, and the key location? And how we do this is something I showed you earlier. We're going to do a kubectl describe. Oh, excuse me. Let's go back. We need to get that. Let me copy this. And we're going to do a kubectl describe pod. Okay, in the namespace of kube-system. Okay, now when I scroll up, you can see here under command, under etcd, you'll see that there is a bunch of basically paths to where all these things are located. So you see the cert file, the CA cert, okay, Where is that? So let's look for that. And the CA cert, if you scroll down here, is right here. CA.cert, right? So trusted file. So what you're going to do is you're going to put the location in where this file is. So the trusted CA file is here. So we're now going to go back here, right? We're going to remove that and we're going to put that in. Okay, and so now we have the path to the CA cert file, where that's located. Now we're going to go into the cert file, and you can see that's up here, and we're going to copy this path. So let's copy that. Let's go back here, and we're going to delete this, and we're going to paste that in. Okay, now we're looking for the key file. Where's the key file? So if you go down here and look for the actual key file, right? The path is right here, and we're now going to copy this in. Okay. Now the last thing, now that we have all the certs and the paths to those certs, we're now going to save it. Snapshot save. And what you could do is you could put a path in here on the cluster or off the cluster. Okay. What I like to do, as long as the cluster has access. So for example, if you need an NFS mount or an objects share, right? For NFS, you're going to have that mounted already here, right? So one thing you could do is you could save it locally and then do an SCP later to copy that file off onto another location, right? As an example. So all we're going to do is we're going to come down here for now, and we're going to just call this test etcd. And we'll call this .db. So let's go back here. .db. So I'll hit enter. Oh, that's interesting. Server key. Cert. Oh, I think I may have messed up here. Hang on here. There's the key file. Server key. Etsy Kubernetes PKI etcd server key. Let me see if I have to do a sudo on this. Okay. So I actually had to sudo to do that command, which I guess would make sense. So what we're going to do now is we're going to validate the file. By verifying the snapshot. So let's copy this command. Okay. And we're going to tsetd.db. And here you go. So now we have the hash, the revision, the total keys, and the size. If you do an LL, you can see here that your backup of the Etsy key value store is done. So again, very, very quickly, what we did was we installed etcd-ctl. We then went into the control plane, pulled up the pod for etcd, and described the pod, and we're able to get all the information we need under the command, right? The paths to all the certs. And then we named our backup, right? And our location was local, the local home directory that I'm defaulted to right now under Mike. And we got an error. I didn't run sudo, so I had to actually elevate my permissions to sudo and ran it with sudo, and it verified the file. And now we have a backup of etcd. So again, this is something that you're going to want to do. You're going to want to automatically schedule it. Now, when we get into some of the other solutions out there that are more managed solutions for on-prem Kubernetes, and when I mean managed, I mean more automation type solutions, they'll have etcd backup built into the platform, right? So you can use different things like OpenShift, right? You could do etcd backups there. You can create, there's some automation already created there. So again, very important to back this up. This gives all your cluster configuration. Something ever happens, you can restore this. So the question is, well, how do you restore? So this is how basically you restore. Now, this gets a little bit kludgy because what happens is when you restore the cluster, right, you're going to point to the data directory, which is where we saved the file, and you're going to restore it. Now, what happens though is that it says here the Kubernetes API server must be reconfigured accordingly. So if the URLs or access URLs of the restored cluster are changed from the previous cluster, then you have to make changes, right? So it's not as cut and dry as simply just restoring the database and you're back to normal. You may have to make some changes to get the cluster back to a working state. Okay, we will talk about, again, we'll talk about that later. But what you're doing basically is you're still doing, using etcd-ctl, you're pointing to the data directory where the snapshot is, and you're using the restore command. Okay, now I don't want to do that now because obviously I don't need to restore it. And it should work fine. So what's going to happen is we'll probably check this out at a later time when we maybe simulate a failure of a cluster and go through an actual restore process. You can actually see what that looks like. Okay, so that's backing up and protecting etcd key value store. Let's move on to actually upgrading the cluster. So what we're going to do is, we're on the Kubernetes.io site, we're going to do upgrading your cluster. So let's go to upgrading here. And you can see here, again, the documentation points you right to what you need to do. So we are going to be upgrading a kubeadm cluster because that's how we deployed our cluster, right? And we're going to find the version we're on. I believe we're on 1.2.7. Let me just validate that. Let me close this window. Let me clear this. And we're going to see what version. So we're on 1.2.8.8. So what we're going to do is we're going to click the link of upgrading a kubeadm cluster from 1.28 to 1.29. Okay. Very important that you look at before you begin. Make sure you read the release notes if anything has changed. Make sure you back up your components such as app levels, database. Again, we talked about etcd, that's one thing. But also if you have any applications that are running databases on your Kubernetes cluster, you obviously want to back those up. And the kubeadmin does not touch any workloads, only components, right, of the Kubernetes environment. And then you want to go through additional information, right, about draining nodes, etc. And then considerations around etcd. So we're going to have to be upgrading basically all the things that we, so KubeADM upgrade, we're going to be upgrading all the components to the latest. And the first thing we're going to do is upgrade the control plane nodes. Okay. And what we're going to do is, since we're on Ubuntu, we're going to look at upgrading 1.2.28.8 to 1.29.x. Now we're going to have to find out what the latest patch version is for 1.29. I don't know what that is. We'll do a search on that here in a minute. We're going to do an install, right? An update and an install, and we're going to mark hold the KubeADM solution. And then we're going to go through and verify the upgrade plan. We're going to choose a version to upgrade. Okay. Then we're going to drain the node. So draining a node basically removes the pods, right? So any active pods that are running where you need to upgrade kubelet and kubectl, you'll upgrade that. You'll do a reload, you'll do a restart on kubelet. Remember, kubelet is a service. And then we're going to uncordon the node. So basically draining the node, the drain command, kubectl drain, will basically remove the pods, okay? And basically it'll cordon the node. Basically it'll say, okay, don't allow any pods to run in this node until you uncordon the node. So you go through a drain, you upgrade kubelet and kubectl, you'll restart kubelet, and then you'll uncordon the node, and then you'll go through upgrade of the worker nodes. Okay. And we'll upgrade Linux nodes. So what we're going to do is we'll start this process now. First, we're going to look at what is the Kube patch version, the latest. Let's do a search on that. Latest patch version for Kubernetes, if I could spell, 1.29. The latest patch version as of April 16th is 1.29.4. So that's what we're going to use. Okay, so let's move this over here. Let's clear this, and remember we're on the control plane. So if we do kubectl get nodes, that's the name of the control plane. Okay, so let's clear that, and we're on version 1.28.8. So make sure you understand that. We're going to do the control plane first. This should be kind of a common thing because most systems, most platforms that have an operations or a control plane will require you to upgrade a control plane before anything else, right? So that's what we're doing first and foremost. So what we're doing here is we're going to be doing okay. So we're going to copy this. And we're going to go back here and we're going to mark this top 4. And we're going to wait for this to download. Pure KubeADM. Oh, I think .4 may not be. Hang on one second here. Okay, so what we're finding here is I'm using an older community-owned package repository. You can see here pkgsk8.io, and that's not giving me access beyond 1.28. So what I need to do is change the Kubernetes package repository. Let's see how we do this here. See. Yep. So it says here, if you see a line similar to this, yep, it's exactly this. Otherwise, I'm recommending migrate to Kubernetes bank. You're using the Kubernetes package repositories, and this guide applies to you. Switching to other Kubernetes package repository. Okay, so let's do this. Okay, so let's control C out of this. What did I do here? The pager. I'm not sure what pager does or how to get out of this. Okay, it was Shift Q. Okay, so it's clear. Let's go back here. And I don't use nano, I use VI. So let's VI this. And you should see a single line. If you're using 1.8, you should see this. Changes the version to URL to the next available minor release, for example. Okay, so you can see here I have to change this now. So let's insert on this. Actually, so I'm going to do this, but I have to sudo. And I have to go down here and change this to 1.29. And I have to save the file. Okay. So if I do pager now, it should say 1.29, and it does. Okay, so that's it. Right here, and let's clear this. Now let's go back and do a sudo apt update. And if I do this now, I should be able to see that 1.29 versions are there. And they are. So you can see here 1.29.4. And that's the version that we have access to now. Because as you recall, it failed previously. So now that I have that proper repository, I should be able to go through the process. So let's go through here. And we're going to, it's already 2.9. We're going to change this to .4. Beautiful. Now it's working. And I'm probably going to have to do this on the worker node too, I believe. Let's just see here. It's clear. So let's verify the version. It's version 1.29.4. Let's verify the plan. And you can see here it's running the pre-flight checks and running cluster health checks. You can now apply the upgrade by executing the following command, upgrade apply. Okay, so let's copy this. Paste it. Let's do a sudo. Yes to proceed. And you can see here we're going from kubeadm 1.28.8 to 1.29.4. Okay, now you see that the upgrade has been successful. It says now that your control plane is upgraded, please proceed with upgrading your kubelets if you haven't already done so. So we're going to upgrade kubelet and kubectl. So let's clear this. Let's have a fresh screen here. And now we're going to scroll down to upgrading, draining the node, excuse me. So let's drain the node. This is the command to drain. And this will mark the node unschedulable, evicting workloads. So we're going to okay, so you can see here all of the items that were evicted, right, was a CNI, core DNS, kubeproxy, etc. So now that the node is drained, matter of fact, if I do a kubectl get nodes, you can see here that the control plane is disabled, right, for scheduling. Okay, that will allow us to upgrade kubelet and kubectl. So now we're going to go down to upgrade kubelet and kubectl, and we're going to copy this command. Okay, so now we're going to upgrade kubelet and kubectl. I copied the command and changed the 1.1.29.x to 1.29.4. and it'll pull down the dash 2.1, which is the latest. And yes, we want kubelet service to restart, so hit OK. And we can check yeah, so kubelet is running. And now we're going to check the versions. Can't remember if this was the dash version. It was. So kubelet 1.29.4 and kubectl is just version, I believe, which it is. Yeah, 1.29.4. The kubelet service is running, and now we're going to uncordon the node. So we do a copy here, uncordon K8s, control. And now we do a kubectl get nodes. Let's clear this. ctl get nodes. You can see here that we have status ready, our K8s control plane is ready, our schedulable, and version 1.29.4. So the control plane has been upgraded. So now we have to upgrade the worker nodes. And so it says here upgrade worker nodes, and you're going to follow right along. I'm using Linux worker nodes, right? I'm running Ubuntu. There are Windows worker nodes as well, but let's focus on Linux for now. And let's go here. I have to. Get out 195. Okay, same thing. on the worker node, we're going to have to update the repository. So let's go back to okay. Again, you can see here, oh, let me get out of here because I did it again. Need to sudo this. And we're going to change this to 1.29. Okay. Then we're going to do a sudo apt update. And okay, so I'm at the point where I've drained my worker nodes, right? And you can see here, one thing you have to do is you have to know when to switch back between the worker node and the master node, right? So obviously we did the kubeadm upgrade on the worker node through SSH, and then I went back to the master node and I did a drain command. And you can see here, if I do a kubectl get nodes, you'll see that the worker node is now scheduled disabled, so it's basically cordoned, okay, and ready to be upgraded. So the next thing we need to do is we need to upgrade kubelet and kubectl back on the worker node. So I'll go back over here, and we're going to choose .4, just like we did with kubeadm. And we're going to restart kubelet, and we're going to do a kubectl system, we're going to do a sudo system ctl status kubelet. You can see that it's running. We're going to do a kubelet dash version 1.29.4, and we're going to do a kubectl version. Oh. And that's 1.29.4. And now we're going to uncordon the node to allow it to be schedulable. So now we're going to do kubectl. And how we do this is we go back to the master and do a kubectl uncordon Kate's worker kubectl get nodes, and now you can see that I have my control plane that's been updated to 1.29.4, my worker node that's been updated to 1.29.4, and it's schedulable and ready. So we're ready to go. So in order to test this, we're going to deploy an application. We'll deploy Nginx once again. So we'll do a kubectl run Nginx image Nginx, and we'll do a kubectl get pods, and you can see here Nginx is running, and we'll do a kubectl describe pod Nginx, and it's scheduled, successfully running, the image was pulled, and now I have an Nginx instance container running on Kubernetes right now in the upgraded cluster. So I know we had some challenges going through this. It wasn't as cut and dry. So basically what it came down to is the fact that my repository needed to be set to the 1.29 code release, because I was going from a 1.28.8 release, right, to a 1.29 release. Let's kubectl get nodes. And what happened was when I did an apt update, right, and I pulled from the Kubernetes repository, it only pulled the updates for 1.28. Now I could have went from 1.28.8 and there was a minor release of 1.28.9, but I wanted to get to the latest 1.29, which is 1.29.4. So I had to upgrade that settings file, right? Let's go back. It wasn't really called the settings file. It was called the basically from the sources Kubernetes.list file. Okay, and when I changed that to 1.29, it allowed me to do a sudo apt update again. It pulled the 1.29 releases, and I was able to go from there. So again, I know this wasn't as smooth as I'd like it to be, but what we did was we basically, on the control plane in order, we upgraded kubeadm. Okay, we then drained the control plane node, which was k8-control, meaning that we cordoned it off, we made it unschedulable. We then upgraded kubelet and kubectl. We restarted the kubelet service. We verified the versions, and then we uncordoned the node to make it schedulable again. Then what we did is we went and we SSH'd into the K8's worker node, and we did a kubeadm upgrade on that node, and then we attempted to drain it. Because I was running an application Nginx, it gave me an error and wouldn't allow me to drain it. Now it did disable the scheduling, but Nginx was still running. So what would happen is you would have an outage, you would have an issue in that application. So what I did was I removed Nginx, deleted it as an application, which you wouldn't do in production, right? You would have multiple worker nodes, and you would have a minimum replica count. So for example, if you had a minimum replica count of 1 for Nginx and you had 2 worker nodes in the cluster, when you drain that node, that pod would then be scheduled on the available node, because you wouldn't do both worker nodes at the same time, right? You would do this in a rolling fashion to make sure that you are not impacting production. Going back now, we then drained K8's worker after Nginx was deleted, and we then upgraded on the K8's worker the kubelet and kubectl, restarted kubelet, verified the versions, and then we went back to the master and uncordoned the worker node. So you can see here there's many steps into manually updating a Kubernetes cluster. You can imagine this is only a one control plane, one worker node cluster. Imagine a larger cluster with multiple control planes and several worker nodes. And you could have many different, worker nodes for different things, and you could have a control plane that's maybe 3 nodes, 4, 5, 6 nodes, etc. In some cases, you could have an etcd cluster on its own, not built within the control plane. So again, all of these things have to be thought about as you go through the upgrade process. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because when we get into the section on more managed services, right? More automation solutions like OpenShift. Nutanix has NKE, soon to be Day2IQ, Rancher, those things, right? You're going to find that this process is much easier, right? The life cycle of the maintenance, right, around operational maintenance of Kubernetes cluster becomes a much easier process. When we get into some of the add-ons, there's still challenges there, especially around operators. And we'll talk about operators a little bit later, but essentially, as you add flexibility and more capability in integration with the operator framework, the upgrade process has to now align with what the operator supports. So, for example, say you decide to use an operator that does something, say it's a database service, right? And you want to upgrade to this 1.29.4, that operator has to support 1.29.4, and so that has to be upgraded as well. So I have seen cases, and this is one of the complaints I see out a lot in the enterprise space and what customers are using, especially around operators, is operators are not keeping up with Kubernetes versions. And so that becomes a challenge as well. So now you're stuck, right? So say you want to take advantage of a Kubernetes feature that was brought into a version, right? Like 1.29.4, and you're using an operator that doesn't support 1.29.4, what do? Well, you can't upgrade. So we'll talk about the challenges of that later, but essentially, I hope you guys got an understanding of how the upgrade process works when using kubeadm enabled cluster. Again, this is how we created the cluster, so this is how you have to upgrade it. And this is kind of the manual way of creating a Kubernetes cluster to show you the challenges around that. So today we covered maintenance around etcd backups, right, your key value store, as well as upgrading your Kubernetes cluster and Kubernetes versions for kubeadm clusters, kubelet, kubectl, etc. So again, I hope you have a great rest of the week. Happy Mother's Day today to all the mothers out there. And I look forward to talking to you next week. I think next week we'll really start talking about basic pod creation, how you can access pods, and we'll get into more advanced topics like networking and persistent storage. All right? Have a good one.